What if I told you a protest about tea helped spark a global revolution? It happened right here in Boston in the dead of night. Disguises, sabotage, silence, and a powerful empire watching in disbelief. This is the real story of the Boston Tea Party. What caused it, who pulled it off, and why it changed history forever. To understand the Tea Party, you have to understand the anger brewing in the colonies. It wasn't just about taxes, it was about power, control, and being treated like second-class citizens. The Tea Act of 1773 allowed the British East India Company to sell tea directly to the colonies, taxed tea, undercutting local merchants and bypassing colonial governments. To the British, it was a bailout for a struggling company. To the colonists, it was a sneaky power move, another example of taxation without representation. And the Sons of Liberty had had enough. On December 16, 1773, a crowd of more than 5,000 colonists packed into Boston's Old South Meeting House. Tensions were high. The tea ships were in the harbor, and by law, the cargo had to be unloaded and taxed. But Governor Thomas Hutchinson refused to let them leave. That night, a group of around 60 men, many dressed as Mohawk warriors to conceal their identities, slipped through the streets toward the docks. They weren't drunk. They weren't angry rioters. They were organized, disciplined, and dead serious. One by one, the Sons of Liberty boarded the Dartmouth, Eleanor, and Beaver, 3 British ships loaded with over 90,000 pounds of tea. They worked quickly and silently, breaking open the crates and dumping the contents into Boston Harbor. By morning, the water was stained brown and reeking of tea. Here's a detail most people miss. They swept the decks when they were done. This wasn't looting. It was a political message. We reject your rule, and we'll do it with honor. The British were furious. In response, Parliament passed the Coercive Acts, what the colonists called the Intolerable Acts. They closed Boston Harbor, dissolved the Massachusetts government, and sent in more British troops. But the plan backfired. Instead of breaking the resistance, it united the colonies. Militias formed. Congress gathered. The first shots of the revolution were now only months away. The Boston Tea Party wasn't just a protest. It was the spark that lit the fuse. And what's most surprising? The men behind the Boston Tea Party kept their secret for decades. Not a single name was revealed until the revolution was long over. That's how powerful this moment was, and still is. April 19th, 1775. In a sleepy Massachusetts village, 77 farmers stood silently facing 700 British soldiers. A shot rang out. No one knew who fired it, but that one bullet started a war that changed the world. For months, tensions had been building. Parliament cracked down after the Boston Tea Party. British troops flooded Boston, and across the colonies, militias quietly trained, stockpiled weapons, and prepared for something unthinkable: war with the British Empire. On April 18th, General Gage sent 700 troops to seize colonial weapons hidden in Concord, but the colonists were watching. Lanterns lit the Old North Church, 1 if by land, 2 if by sea. And in the dead of night, 3 riders galloped into the countryside to warn the militias. Paul Revere, William Dawes, and Samuel Prescott risked everything. Revere was captured. Dawes was thrown from his horse. But Prescott broke through, and the alarm spread like wildfire. By sunrise, the Minutemen were ready. As the sun rose, 7 colonial militia faced off against 700 British regulars. Captain John Parker told his men not to provoke. But suddenly, bang, a single shot. Chaos erupted. 8 colonists were killed. The British moved on, but the war had begun. At Concord, things were different. Hundreds of Minutemen were waiting. At the North Bridge, they opened fire. The British fell back and then began a brutal retreat. Along the 18-mile road back to Boston, colonists fired from behind rocks, trees, and fences. By the end of the day, nearly 300 British soldiers were dead or wounded. The British thought they'd crush a rebellion. Instead, they sparked a revolution. The colonies now had blood on their hands and purpose in their hearts. Within weeks, militias surrounded Boston, and just 2 months later, they'd face off again at Bunker Hill. The American Revolution didn't begin with declarations. It began with fear, fire, and the courage of farmers. This was the shot heard round the world, and it was only the beginning. It wasn't really fought on Bunker Hill. It wasn't really a victory, but it changed everything. This is the story of one of the bloodiest battles of the American Revolution, a battle that proved the colonies wouldn't go down easily. Welcome to the Battle of Bunker Hill. The year is 1775. Tensions between the British Crown and American colonists are exploding. Just 2 months earlier, shots were fired at Lexington and Concord. Now, Boston is under siege, but the British still hold the city and the strategic high ground that surrounds it. To break the siege, British General Thomas Gage orders troops to take control of the hills north of Boston. The colonists, led by Colonel William Prescott, learn of the plan and make a bold move. On the night of June 16, 1775, over 1,000 colonial militiamen climb Breed's Hill, not Bunker Hill, as the name would suggest, and begin fortifying it under cover of darkness. By morning, British ships in the harbor see what the rebels have done, and they are furious. On June 17th, British General William Howe lands over 2,000 soldiers on the peninsula. Their mission? Storm the hill, crush the rebellion. As the Redcoats advance, Colonel Prescott gives a famous, perhaps legendary, order. Don't fire until you see the whites of their eyes. The first and second British assaults are shattered by colonial gunfire, but the third attack breaks through. With powder running low, the colonists are overwhelmed. The British take the hill, but at a staggering cost. Over 1,000 casualties, nearly half of their force. The colonists retreat, but they leave behind a powerful message. They will fight, they will bleed, and they will not be easily defeated. The battle shook the British military and inspired the colonies. Soon after, George Washington would take command of the Continental Army. Recruitment surged, and full-scale war was inevitable. Bunker Hill wasn't a victory for the rebels, but it was a revolutionary moment. Today, a granite obelisk towers over Charlestown, marking the place where blood was spilled and history was made. Remember their courage, because revolutions are not won in a single day, but in moments like these. Winter 1775, Boston is trapped. British soldiers occupy the city while the Continental Army surrounds it. The siege drags on for months. Cold, hunger, and frustration grip both sides. Washington has men. He has courage, but what he doesn't have are cannons. Far to the north, in the ruins of Fort Ticonderoga, cannons lie abandoned, massive guns, the kind Washington desperately needs. But how do you move 60 tons of iron across 300 miles of frozen wilderness? This mad gamble would be called the Noble Train of Artillery, and it would decide the fate of Boston. Henry Knox, just 25 years old, takes command. Through blizzards, mountains, and half-frozen rivers, his men drag the cannon south. Weeks of back-breaking struggle, each mile of victory. Villagers stop and stare. Some cheer, others doubt. But still, the cannons roll. In March 1776, the impossible becomes real. Under the cover of night, Washington's men haul the guns up Dorchester Heights. When dawn breaks, Boston awakens to a nightmare. The British commander has no choice. Attacked from the heights, the city is doomed. Within days, the Redcoats abandon Boston and sail away. For the first time in the Revolution, the people cheer a great victory. Washington has saved the cause, not with a battle, but with an idea and the courage to see it through. On July 4th, 1776, a single document changed the course of history. But what really happened inside that hot, crowded room in Philadelphia? And why did it nearly tear the colonies apart before it united them? By 1776, the American colonies had been at war with Britain for over a year. Battles at Lexington, Concord, and Bunker Hill had already spilled blood. Yet, officially, the colonies were still part of the British Empire. The idea of full independence was radical, even dangerous. Many colonists still hoped for reconciliation with King George III. But the king had already declared the colonies to be in open rebellion. There was no turning back. In June 1776, the Continental Congress appointed a committee to draft a formal declaration. The men chosen were Thomas Jefferson, John Adams, Benjamin Franklin, Roger Sherman, and Robert Livingston. But it was Jefferson, just 33 years old, soft-spoken, but a gifted writer, who was tasked with putting pen to paper. In a rented room in Philadelphia, Jefferson wrote for days. Drawing on Enlightenment ideals and colonial grievances, his central message was bold. Governments exist to protect the rights of the people, and if they fail, the people have the right to overthrow them. Jefferson's draft was presented to Congress on June 28, 1776. For days, delegates argued fiercely. Some feared the language was too radical. Others thought it wasn't strong enough. One passage condemned the slave trade, but Southern delegates demanded it be removed. In the end, about a quarter of Jefferson's words were cut or revised. Still, the heart of the document, the words that would echo through history, remained intact. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. On July 2nd, the Continental Congress voted for independence, but on July 4th, they approved Jefferson's document, forever marking it as the Declaration of Independence. The signing, however, was not immediate. Only John Hancock, the President of Congress, boldly signed that day. Most delegates signed weeks later, in August, each man knowing he was committing treason against the crown. As Benjamin Franklin famously quipped, "We must all hang together, or most assuredly, we shall all hang separately." The Declaration was more than just a notice to Britain. It was a message to the world. It transformed the American Revolution from a colonial rebellion into a fight for universal ideals of liberty and self-government. Copies spread across the colonies, read aloud in town squares, and even translated abroad. It inspired revolutions in France, Haiti, and Latin America. Jefferson's words would outlive even the revolution itself. Though imperfect and filled with contradictions, especially in a land still practicing slavery, the Declaration laid down a vision of freedom that generations would struggle to fulfill. In 1776, 13 colonies declared independence, but in truth, they declared something far greater. The idea that liberty belongs to all people, an idea that still echoes across the world today. Summer 1776, just weeks after declaring independence, the revolution faces its first true test. The British are coming, and not just a few regiments, the largest expeditionary force Britain had ever assembled. Over 400 ships sail into New York Harbor, carrying more than 30,000 troops. Redcoats, Hessian mercenaries and sailors, a force larger than the population of Philadelphia itself. General George Washington, commanding barely 20,000 men, most untrained militia, braces for impact. He knows New York is vital. Whoever controls the city controls the war. On August 27th, the Battle of Long Island begins. The British outflank the Patriots under cover of darkness. Washington's men fight bravely, but they are outmatched. Hundreds are killed, thousands captured. But Washington refuses to surrender under cover of night and a providential fog. He leads his army across the East River to Manhattan. Every man, every cannon, every scrap of hope, saved from total annihilation. New York falls to the British. For the rest of the war, it will remain under royal control. But the Continental Army lives on. Defeat after defeat, Washington learns. He trades cities for survival, land for time. His genius is not in victory, but in endurance. The New York campaign was a disaster on paper, but in truth, it proved something greater, that this revolution would not end with one defeat. Because Washington's army lived to fight another day, and the war for independence marched on. By the winter of 1776, the American Revolution was nearly lost. Washington's army had suffered crushing defeats in New York, beaten back again and again. They retreated across New Jersey, pursued by the British. Once 20,000 strong, his force had dwindled to barely 3,000 starving, freezing, and weary men. Desertion was rampant. Morale was broken. And in just days, many soldiers' enlistments would expire. If nothing changed, the revolution itself would collapse. Amid despair, Washington made a desperate decision. He would strike back. His target, the town of Trenton, New Jersey, held by nearly 1,500 Hessian mercenaries hired by the British Crown. His plan was simple but daring. Cross the icy Delaware River on Christmas night, march 9 miles before dawn, and launch a surprise attack. Success could save the revolution. Failure would destroy it. On the evening of December 25th, 1776, as families celebrated Christmas, Washington's men gathered silently on the river's edge. A nor'easter howled through the night. Freezing rain, snow, and ice cutting through their worn clothes. Through darkness and storm, they began their crossing. By 3 a.m., the crossing was complete. Against all odds, every man, horse, and cannon had reached the Jersey shore. But the ordeal was far from over. Washington's army now marched 9 freezing miles toward Trenton. The wind cut like knives. Many soldiers had no shoes, leaving bloody footprints in the snow. Yet not a man broke ranks, for they knew this march was more than a march to battle. It was a march to save a revolution. At dawn, December 26th, Washington's army descended upon Trenton. The Hessians, still weary from Christmas night festivities, were caught off guard. With drums beating and muskets cracking, the Continentals surged into the town. Street by street, house by house, they pressed the attack. The fighting lasted less than an hour. The Hessians, surrounded and disoriented, surrendered. Nearly 1,000 prisoners were taken. American losses? Just 2 men killed in battle. In one stunning stroke, Washington had done the impossible, revived the revolution. News of the victory spread like wildfire. Hope returned to a weary people. Recruitment soared. Washington's men re-enlisted, inspired by the belief that independence was still within reach. The Battle of Trenton was not just a military victory, it was a psychological one. Against all odds, Washington had proven the revolution would not die quietly, in the snow. Trenton was more than a battle. It was a message that the spirit of liberty could endure defeat, despair, and even the dead of winter. The Revolution was alive, and from this night onward, there would be no turning back. It was January 1777. The American Revolution was on the brink of collapse. The British believed they were about to end it once and for all. But George Washington had one final gamble left, a daring maneuver that would change the war forever. This is the story of the Battle of Princeton. The Continental Army had just shocked the world with their victory at Trenton on December 26, 1776. Washington's Christmas night crossing of the icy Delaware River was daring, but it came at a cost. His men were exhausted, many without shoes, leaving bloody footprints in the snow. Supplies were scarce, and enlistments were about to expire. The Revolution could still collapse within days. Meanwhile, the British were furious. General Lord Cornwallis gathered nearly 8,000 experienced troops to crush Washington once and for all. By January 2nd, 1777, Cornwallis had Washington pinned near the Assunpink Creek in Trenton. The Continental Army faced annihilation. That night, Washington made a bold decision. Instead of retreating or surrendering, he ordered his men to keep the campfires burning to deceive the British. Drums echoed in the night, making it seem like the Continentals were preparing to fight at dawn. But under cover of darkness, Washington led 5,000 men on a secret night march around Cornwallis's army. Their target, the British rear guard at Princeton. The march was grueling. The soldiers trudged through frozen mud, their muskets wrapped in cloth to muffle sound. Horses pulled cannons quietly over back roads. The fate of the Revolution rested on silence and discipline. At sunrise on January 3, 1777, the Americans encountered British troops under Colonel Charles Mawhood near Princeton. Mawhood's men were some of the best in the British Army, hardened by years of war. As the two forces collided, the American militia faltered under the fierce British charge. Panic spread, and for a moment, defeat seemed certain. It was then that George Washington rode to the front. Against the advice of his officers, he placed himself between his men and the enemy, just 30 yards from British muskets. Cannonballs tore through the ground, musket balls whizzed past. But Washington stood firm, rallying his men. "Parade with us, my brave fellows." His presence turned panic into determination. Inspired by Washington's courage, the Americans counterattacked. Brigadier General Hugh Mercer fought valiantly, but was mortally wounded, refusing to surrender until the end. Reinforcements under John Cadwalader and Nathaniel Greene arrived, steadying the line. The battle raged across the frozen fields and orchards of Princeton. Muskets flashed, bayonets clashed, and cannon fire shook the ground. Finally, the British line broke. Mawhood's troops fled toward Trenton, while others retreated to New Brunswick. In less than an hour, Washington had secured a second stunning victory in just 10 days. The Battle of Princeton was not the largest battle of the war, but its impact was enormous. The victories at Trenton and Princeton restored hope in the American cause. Recruitment surged, morale soared. For the first time, ordinary colonists truly believed independence might be possible. Even the world took notice. Reports spread across Europe of Washington's daring maneuvers. In France, leaders who had doubted the Revolution began to reconsider. The young American Republic had shown it could fight and win. The winter of 1776 had begun with despair and near defeat, but by January 1777, thanks to two bold gambles at Trenton and Princeton, the Revolution was alive. George Washington had not only saved his army, he had saved the dream of independence. By the summer of 1777, the British launched a bold plan to cut the colonies in half. General John Burgoyne marched south from Canada, his army of redcoats, Hessians, and native allies pushing deep into New York. His goal? To seize the Hudson River and crush the rebellion once and for all. But the Americans would not give up New York so easily. General Horatio Gates, joined by the fiery Benedict Arnold and the cunning riflemen of Daniel Morgan, prepared to block Burgoyne's path. What followed would become the most decisive campaign of the war. The first clash came at Freeman's Farm. Burgoyne's army advanced only to meet a hail of American musket fire. Morgan's sharpshooters targeted British officers, sowing chaos in the ranks. Though Burgoyne held the field, his army paid dearly in blood. Just weeks later, the British struck again at Bemis Heights. But this time, the Americans were ready. Benedict Arnold, reckless, fearless, disobeying orders, charged into battle. His leadership turned the tide. The British lines collapsed. Burgoyne's army was shattered. On October 17, 1777, Burgoyne surrendered his entire army of nearly 6,000 men. For the first time, a British field army laid down its arms to the Americans. The world took notice. In Paris, the victory at Saratoga silenced the doubters. France, convinced the revolution could succeed, pledged open support. Soon, French money, weapons, and warships would change the balance of power forever. The Battle of Saratoga was more than just a victory. It was the turning point of the American Revolution, a moment when hope became strategy and rebellion became revolution. The American Revolution might have ended in disaster by 1777. Washington's army was starving, morale was collapsing, and Britain seemed unstoppable. But then, a powerful ally entered the fight, a nation with a navy, money, and a burning desire for revenge. Without them, independence may never have come. This is the story of the French alliance of 1778. For Washington, the fight was simple: survive. For Congress, the fight was diplomatic: convince Europe that America wasn't a lost cause. One victory in the forests of New York did more than raise morale. It caught the attention of America's most unlikely savior, France. The French didn't love the idea of a republic, but they loved the idea of Britain losing even more. Franklin was no ordinary ambassador. He was a celebrity, adored in Parisian salons where support for America became fashionable. In that moment, the United States was no longer fighting alone. It had the wealth of a kingdom and the power of a navy at its side. What began as a colonial rebellion became an international conflict Britain could not contain. The road to Yorktown began not just on American soil, but in the signing rooms of Paris. In fighting for America's liberty, France lit a fire that would soon consume its own monarchy. The French alliance of 1778 was more than a treaty. It was the turning point that transformed rebellion into revolution, and revolution into independence. Without France, the United States might never have been born. October 1781. The fate of the American Revolution hangs in the balance. On a quiet peninsula in Virginia, the last major battle of the war is about to begin. British General Charles Cornwallis has fortified Yorktown. He believes reinforcements from the Royal Navy will save him. But George Washington and the Continental Army, joined by thousands of French troops under Rochambeau, see an opportunity. Together, with the French fleet cutting off the sea, they move to trap the British. By late September, nearly 17,000 American and French troops surround Yorktown. They dig trenches, drag heavy cannons into position, and begin a relentless bombardment. For days, the thunder of artillery shakes the ground. Cornwallis's defenses crumble. On October 14th, Washington orders a daring night attack. Alexander Hamilton leads one column against Redoubt 10. The French storm Redoubt 9. Bayonets clash in the darkness. Minutes later, both positions fall. The noose tightens. Trapped, outnumbered, and cut off from escape, Cornwallis makes a desperate attempt to flee across the York River, but a sudden storm scatters his boats. He has no choice. On October 17, 1781, Cornwallis surrenders his entire army. Over 7,000 British troops lay down their arms. The news shocks the globe. In London, Parliament is shaken. In America, church bells ring. The war is not officially over, but the fighting spirit of the British is broken. The Revolution has been won. Yorktown was not just a battle. It was the moment the impossible became reality. A new nation had secured its place in history. Remember their courage, because freedom was forged here. By 1778, the Revolutionary War had dragged on for 3 long years. Britain had suffered humiliating defeats at Saratoga and seen France officially join the war on America's side. Stalemates in the North had drained resources and morale, so London turned to a new plan: shift the war to the South. Why the South? The British believed the southern colonies were crawling with loyalists who would rally to the crown. The South was also rich in cash crops like rice, indigo, and tobacco, vital to sustaining the empire. If Britain could capture the southern ports and rally loyalist militias, they hoped the revolution would collapse from within. But what began as a confident march would spiral into a brutal, grinding conflict that tested both sides to the core. The first target was Georgia. In December 1778, British troops landed near Savannah. The American defenses were weak, outnumbered, and unprepared. Within days, Savannah fell, and Georgia became the first colony reoccupied by the Crown. The capture was swift but devastating. Hundreds of patriots were killed or captured. Loyalist support surged as Britain declared Georgia restored to royal authority. It seemed the Southern strategy was working, but resistance was not finished. But the Patriots were not ready to give up Georgia. In 1779, American forces, reinforced by their new French allies, launched an ambitious siege to retake Savannah. For weeks, cannons thundered, but the British held strong. On October 9th, a massive Franco-American assault tried to storm the city. It was a disaster. Over 1,000 Allied troops were killed or wounded, including the young Polish hero Casimir Pulaski, who died leading a cavalry charge. The failed siege crushed Patriot hopes and cemented Britain's grip on Georgia. If Savannah was a victory, Charleston was a masterpiece. In the spring of 1780, British General Sir Henry Clinton led nearly 14,000 troops against the vital port city of Charleston, South Carolina. Inside the city, about 5,000 American defenders braced for a siege. For 6 weeks, the British tightened their noose. By May 12th, Charleston surrendered. Over 5,000 American soldiers were captured, the single greatest American defeat of the war. The loss was catastrophic. The southern colonies seemed wide open. Patriot morale plummeted, but sometimes defeat can plant the seeds of resistance. Britain now controlled Georgia and South Carolina. The Southern strategy seemed unstoppable, but in the backwoods and swamps, a new kind of war was brewing. Patriot partisans, Francis Marion, the Swamp Fox, Thomas Sumter, Andrew Pickens, launched daring guerrilla raids. They ambushed British patrols, struck supply lines, and melted back into the wilderness. This unconventional resistance kept hope alive, and it set the stage for epic clashes to come. Kings Mountain, Cowpens, and Guilford Courthouse, where the Southern tide would finally turn. The Southern campaign had begun in triumph for Britain. Savannah, Charleston, one victory after another. But in the swamps and hills, resistance was stirring. In Part 2, we'll see how guerrilla fighters and frontier militias turned the British advance into a bloody nightmare and brought the Revolution to its climax. In the summer of 1780, Britain appeared to control the South. Georgia and South Carolina were firmly in their hands. Loyalist militias were rising, and thousands of American prisoners languished after Charleston's fall. To London, victory seemed close, but in the backcountry, resentment smoldered. Patriot militias struck back, sparking a savage civil war within the Revolution. Neighbor against neighbor, loyalist against rebel. This brutal struggle would soon ignite battles that shifted the war's course. In October 1780, the Revolution found new life at Kings Mountain. A British loyalist force under Major Patrick Ferguson threatened the Carolina frontier. In response, patriot over-mountain men, rugged frontiersmen from today's Tennessee, Virginia, and the Carolinas, marched hundreds of miles to confront him. On October 7th, they surrounded Kings Mountain. From tree to tree, the sharpshooting patriots cut down Ferguson's loyalists. Ferguson himself fell in battle, and his entire force was destroyed. It was a stunning patriot victory and a turning point in the Southern campaign. Just months later, another stunning blow struck Britain at the Battle of Cowpens. American General Daniel Morgan faced feared British cavalry commander Banastre Tarleton. Morgan devised a brilliant trap. Militia would fire 2 volleys, then feign retreat, luring Tarleton's men into a deadly ambush. It worked flawlessly. The British were overwhelmed, losing nearly their entire force. Cowpens electrified patriot morale and proved that American strategy could outwit even Britain's best. By March 1781, General Cornwallis marched his weary army into North Carolina. At Guilford Courthouse, he faced Nathaniel Greene, the new American commander in the South. Greene arranged his troops in layered lines, forcing the British to fight through waves of resistance. The British technically held the field, but their losses were staggering. Nearly a quarter of Cornwallis's army was dead or wounded. Guilford Courthouse was a Pyrrhic victory. Britain had won the battle, but at a cost that pushed Cornwallis toward Virginia and ultimately Yorktown. From the ashes of defeat rose American determination. Kings Mountain, Cowpens, and Guilford Courthouse shattered Britain's illusion of control. Cornwallis bled white, staggered northward to Virginia. The Southern campaign, once Britain's great hope, had instead drained its strength. Ahead lay the final act, Yorktown, where the Revolution would be decided. The Southern campaign had begun as Britain's boldest gamble and ended as its undoing. In the Carolina backcountry, farmers and frontiersmen shattered the might of an empire, and with Cornwallis retreating to Virginia, the stage was set for the climactic showdown at Yorktown. The guns had fallen silent at Yorktown in 1781. But the war was not over. Britain still held New York, Charleston, and Savannah. Tens of thousands of British troops remained in America. And without an official peace treaty, independence was just a dream on paper. The American Revolution still needed one final victory, not on the battlefield, but at the negotiating table in Paris. After Yorktown, the mood in London shifted dramatically. The war had dragged on for nearly 8 exhausting years, draining Britain's treasury and breaking public support. Parliament faced growing protests from ordinary citizens who demanded peace. Even King George III, once determined never to surrender, began to see the inevitable. But Britain didn't want to give up everything. The empire still hoped to control trade, protect loyalists, and keep America weak. The stage was set for a tense diplomatic battle. Representing the United States were 3 men with very different personalities: Benjamin Franklin, John Adams, and John Jay. Franklin, beloved in France and a master of charm, wore his plain fur hat to remind European courts that he represented a new kind of nation, simple, virtuous, and free. John Adams, fiery and stubborn, demanded that Britain recognize full independence without compromise. John Jay, cautious but sharp, distrusted France's motives and pushed for America to negotiate directly with Britain instead of relying too much on French allies. Together, these unlikely partners faced off against Britain's seasoned diplomats. On September 3rd, 1783, after months of tense negotiation, the Treaty of Paris was signed. Its terms shocked the world. Britain formally recognized the independence of the United States. America's borders stretched from the Atlantic Ocean to the Mississippi River, far larger than most expected. The U.S. gained valuable fishing rights off Newfoundland. In return, Congress promised to recommend fair treatment for loyalists and the repayment of pre-war debts. It was a staggering diplomatic triumph. The new United States wasn't just free, it was vast, wealthy, and positioned for growth. But America wasn't the only player. France, Spain, and the Dutch Republic had all fought Britain too. Each got something from the treaty, but none as much as the United States. In fact, Franklin and his team had skillfully outmaneuvered even their French allies, securing terms far better than expected. For Britain, the treaty marked the beginning of the end of its first empire, though a second one in India and elsewhere would soon rise. For America, it was the birth of a nation on the global stage. When news of the treaty reached America, bells rang, cannons fired, and crowds cheered. After years of sacrifice, suffering, and war, the dream of independence was finally real. The Treaty of Paris didn't just end a war. It launched a new nation, one whose story was only just beginning. Want to discover more about the American Revolution? Don't forget to like, subscribe, and join us here on Deeper History.